Two German shepherds shivering in a blizzard. One is pregnant. A U.S. Marine shows up to save them. Cody vanishes one block at a time. Snow climbs storefronts, swallowing signs, and the air tastes like iron. Behind a dark feed store, two German shepherds crouch beside a splintered pallet, the gaunt male facing the gale, the trembling female heavy with life, eyes glassy with cold. Their collars are gone, yet a thin blue ribbon knots the female's fur as if someone tied hope there and fled. A weak bark rises, stops, then repeats with the exact spacing of a metronome. 3 pulses, silence, 3. A truck door thuds. John Carver steps into the whiteout 42, ex-Marine, the kind of steady that storms remember. He tastes danger before he sees it, the wind carrying a metallic whine from somewhere under the drift, like a vent crying. Boot by boot he closes the distance, scanning for wires, traps, anything that explains the code-like bark. The male holds his stare without a snarl, then glances toward a half-buried culvert where powder sifts in rhythmic breaths. The female shudders, one paw lifting. John kneels, gloved hand hovering inches from frost-stiff fur. The male leans, not to bite, but to press a scarred muzzle against his sleeve, as if marking him. Beneath the female's neck, inked numbers flash when ice cracks free, then blur as she moves. A gust snatches John's breath. Somewhere below, a muffled whimper answers the pattern. There aren't only 2 lives here. He shrugs off his coat, squares himself to the storm, and commits in the old way. No hesitation, no backup plan, just duty. The storm watches, waiting for his choice. Tonight, decide. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe no soul should be left in the cold, hit subscribe for more stories of hope. What happened next will shock you. Cody, Wyoming, lay half-buried beneath January's siege. A town pinned to a high valley where planes crash into broken hills. In early January, snow climbed steps, erased curbs, swallowed fences, and pressed against windows until the glass hummed. A feed store sign clacked, a diner's neon open blinked, went dark. Ranches ringed the edges, a scatter of barns bracing roofs under loads that groaned like tired bones. Livestock crowded lean-tos, chimneys coughed steam into a sky that had lost color. Cody felt smaller, rugged yet caught inside a whirling fist. Radios muttered about wind chill. Porch dogs hesitated, then retreated. On the west side, a gravel lane angled toward a modest spread that belonged to John Carver. Timber and stone gave the house a square-shouldered look. A porch wrapped 2 sides, its rail piled. A weathered barn crouched behind a windbreak of spruce. Between house and barn, drifts shaped into frozen waves, crests sharp as knives. John woke before dawn without an alarm because his internal clock never learned to sleep through storms. 42, lean and weathered, he moved with a precision honed by years of duty. He shaved by habit, even when no one would see him. He set coffee to percolate, folded blankets into neat squares, and checked stacked wood with the same attention once reserved for supply counts. Discipline filled spaces, grief left empty. 3 winters earlier he had stood by a grave rimed with hoarfrost while a bugler poured breath into taps. Ellen's name, carved in granite, caught the thin light that felt like an insult. After that day, he pared his world down to tasks that could be completed, and creatures that depended on him. He repaired the fence, mended tack, fed horses, paid the note, and spoke aloud mostly to the weather. Silence followed. Routine kept it from swallowing him. He dressed in layers, thermal, wool, canvas, then a parka that crossed mountains with him before crossing oceans. He laced insulated boots, pulled a watch cap low, drew a scarf across his mouth, and glanced at Ellen's photograph on the mantel, laughing. Head tipped, a strand of hair blown across her cheek the day they fixed the roof together. He pressed a knuckle to the frame and said, "Storms picked a fight." Outside, the gale stepped forward, and he stepped to meet it. Snow struck with the sting of thrown gravel. The porch groaned, then exhaled as the door He punched a path with a shovel, then followed fence posts like a blind man reading Braille. The barn door wore a sugar cornice that slumped when his shoulder hit the plank. Inside, twilight, 2 horses, frost and copper, lifted heads over stall doors, ears forward, breath clouding in bursts. "Morning," he said, voice muffled. He filled buckets, checked heaters, spread fresh bedding, and measured rations by pound, not by guess. Copper nosed his jacket for the apple slice he always carried. Frost stamped once, impatient. He rubbed their muzzles, feeling warmth and rough velvet through gloves. He inspected legs, eyes and hooves for trouble. The roof creaked. A gust found a knothole and whistled, a thin flute note moving along rafter. He worked through a checklist that kept losses rare, latch cross ties, secure the window that never shut right, hang an extra lantern, set the generator to run 10 minutes each hour, crack the door to prevent pressure slams, confirm the kit's contents, stock a bag with syringes, gauze and iodine. He swept the aisle because order calmed him when the world outside bucked. He listened the way Marines listen, for patterns, for breaks, for the sound that doesn't belong. The storm deepened. It felt personal, as if the planes were pushing against his wall. Snow sifted from nail holes and dusted crossbeams. A rope hung with halters, swayed an inch, steadied, then swayed again. He tightened a hinge, cinched a tarp over hay, and checked the feed room latch. He pictured drifts migrating like dunes around the west corner, sculpted by a north. He paused, took off one glove, and pressed the back of his hand to a plank, measuring cold the way his father taught. If you can keep skin there 10 seconds, animals are safe. If not, add heat. He counted to 8 and he nudged the heaters a notch and watched the horses relax, eyelids lowering, tails swishing slowly. He checked the radio and heard a rancher call from south of town, asking about a stray calf on the road. The dispatcher answered with careful instruction. He stepped out to secure a sheet of tin that had started to chatter along the lean-to. Wind shoved hard enough to tilt him. He planted both boots, leaned full weight, and drove screws with methodical turns, eyes narrowed against spin. Snow feathered into his collar and melted down his neck in thin, cold crawls. He thought about the winter Ellen brought home a husky that followed her pickup. They named her Lark and bought a heavier vacuum. Lark died the summer before Ellen. He finished the tin, checked the hinge, and made one more pass through the barn, touching wood, metal and animals as if signing his name to their survival. Eyelashes stuck where rhyme gathered. He closed the big doors, dogged the bar and stood in the vestibule where the wind's voice dropped from a scream to a savage whisper. He repeated the mantra that kept panic small: control the next action, control the next breath. He almost missed it, a thin thread riding between gusts, finer than wire, pitched just above the creak of timber. He took a step, stopped, tilted his head. Nothing. The gale punched, retreated and returned. Again the thread shaped like a bark, but not a healthy one, the kind made when lungs fight ice. It came from beyond the windbreak, toward the feed store near the town limits. John frowned, timing gaps between blasts, trying to locate direction by cadence. He ran possibilities: a neighbor's dog blown off course, a coyote hung in fencing, a fox cornered under a collapsed pallet. Risk weighed itself the way it always did: temperature, visibility, route, return path, chance of losing the line between buildings, cost of waiting, cost of moving. Discipline told him to log the sound, finish chores, and wait for the whiteout to ease. Something else rose with equal authority, a muscle built by choices Ellen would have made. The bark came again, shorter, frayed at the edges, followed by an absence worse than noise. John opened the outer door a crack and watched the world try to enter. The yard blurred into pulses and lines. He grabbed the heavy rope tied between house and barn, clipped it to the iron ring by the jamb, and wrapped it around his wrist. He pulled the goggles down, tucked the scarf tighter, and checked that a space blanket rode in his pocket beside a spare headlamp. He looked at Frost and Copper one last time. Wind gnawed at the shutters, he said softly, repeating a phrase that matched the sound ripping along the eave. Stay steady. He lifted the bar, shouldered the door, and stepped into the storm, drawn by that faint, desperate bark threading the gale like a whispered order. John followed the bark along the rope line, feeling each knot with a gloved palm while gusts shoved him sideways. Snow whirled like ground glass. He kept low, counting paces from the barn to the windbreak, then to the fence gate, then toward the feed store where warped pallets leaned at crooked angles. The sound cut in and out, thin as wire. He paused whenever the gale peaked, then moved during lulls. He ducked, steadied and pressed on. The abandoned shed crouched behind the loading dock, roof bowing under weight, door hanging on one hinge. He eased in sideways, let the wind rush past, and tipped his headlamp to a dim oval. Two shapes huddled against a ribbed wall where siding had blown away. Frost glazed both with a rough crust. The larger shepherd lifted his head first. Amber's eyes widened, steadied and held. The pregnant female barely moved except for a tremor that traveled through her belly. He crouched, extended one hand, palm down. "Easy," he said, voice ragged from cold. The male edged forward, planting himself between the stranger and the mother, not with a snarl but with deliberate guard. When the beam cut low, John saw damage that made his jaw set, pads split and packed with ice, a pink smear across the floor, hair rubbed raw above the hock, muzzle white with rime. The mother trembled so hard her whiskers ticked. Her swollen belly strained her skin, teats looked bluish from chill, each breath shuddered. She had curled toward the corner, backing into the smallest wind she could find, while the male took the outer edge, catching the draft and shielding her flank. John's mind ran the math by reflex. Rescue meant a hard carry through whiteout across ground broken by hidden dips. Delay meant a berth in freezing air and a body too spent to push. He gauged the distance to the house, the angle of the rope line, and the way the gusts set from the north. The horses were secure. The generator ran. The stove held coals. He had a space blanket, a scarf and enough strength left to haul. He could try one at a time and risk leaving the other alone, or bundle both and move slowly. Ellen's face rose the way it always did when choices sharpened. She stood on their porch in his mind, summer light throwing copper through her hair, hands cupping a stray husky's muzzle. She had said, "We don't walk past need, John, not ever." That line had changed decisions on nights worse than this. It changed this one. He looked at the shepherds and gave them names because names made promises. "Courage," he said to the male. An ear flicked. "Mercy," he said to the mother. Her eyes found him for one heartbeat, and in that small beat, he recognized trust born of exhaustion and hope. He shrugged off his parka and shook it open. Cold shot through the layers beneath. He slid his flannel under Mercy's chest to lift her off the ice, then draped the parka across both bodies at once. Courage stayed still, blocking the draft with his flank. John tucked the fabric tight, pinched the zipper closed, and bound the bundle with his scarf. He slid arms beneath Mercy first, feeling the ridge of spine, the trapped heat under matted hair, the flinch when skin met wool. She was heavier than she looked, but he had carried worse under fine. He lifted until her heart thumped against his ribs. Courage rose on shredded paws, steadied himself and leaned so his shoulder touched her through the coat. Outside the wind hit like thrown sand. He pivoted into the blast, let his back take the brunt, and stepped into the blur. The rope line brushed his wrist. He grabbed it, looped it once and moved. 1 yard at a time became progress. Courage padded close, leaving faint crescents of diluted red that the gale tried to erase. Mercy's breath ticked against his sternum, weak but steady. He counted through rhythms. 4 steps. Plant. 4 steps. A lull opened. He used it. A gust followed. He lowered his head and endured. The ground pitched where drifts bridged hollows. His right leg fell through to mid. He bent his knees, drove upward, reset balance and pushed forward. Ice formed on his lashes. He blinked, cleared his vision, and kept the line. A pallet careened out of the white and vanished. He gripped the rope harder and turned his shoulder to shield the bundle. Courage matched him, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the coat that hid the mother. At the windbreak, the blast lost an edge. He ducked, reset his grip and peeled a glove with his teeth long enough to feel Mercy's ear. Warm. He tucked the glove back and sealed the cuff. The yard stretched for a mile. The porch rail appeared and disappeared in kettles of blown powder. The house crouched with windows filmed in frost, light faint behind curtains. He murmured encouragement meant for dogs as much as himself. At the steps a cornice blocked the landing. He drove his shoulder, broke a shelf and climbed. The latch stuck. He hip-checked. The seal popped with a bark of ice. Warmth spilled around them. He crossed the threshold, kicked the door shut, and stood still, listening to the hush of interior. Then he lowered Mercy onto the rug by the stove, without uncovering her. He slid his flannel under her again, doubling the layer between floor and skin. Courage collapsed beside her, head on paws, eyes never leaving the bundle. John moved fast without hurry. He fed the fire and set a kettle to heat. He pulled a kit from a drawer and laid out saline, gauze and blunt scissors. He clipped ice from Courage's fur one shard at a time, keeping his hands where the dog could track them. He flushed the worst splits and wrapped pads with narrow bands, snug but not strangling. He cracked the damper wider and the fire lifted, throwing a steady orange wash over damp fur and steam rising from the towel. From time to time Courage pressed his muzzle against John's wrist, as if checking that the stranger remained. Mercy's side rose in shallow waves, a faint flutter moved under his palm and settled. He whispered, "Hold on," to no one and everyone, and the room seemed to lean closer. Wait. He turned to Mercy. He slid a dry towel along her flank, and watched a tremor ripple through her muscles. He loosened the scarf sling to check for pinching, then retied it to keep the coat secure. Her eyes found his again, dilated with pain and exhaustion yet steady. He tucked a second towel beneath her hindquarters, checked her gums, counted her heartbeats, and looked at the shelf where the phone sat beside a notepad of numbers. He placed his palm over her ribs, and felt a faint bump from within. Time narrowed to this room, this fire, these lies. He filled a bowl with lukewarm water and slid it within reach. Mercy sniffed, then took 2 careful laps. Courage nudged the rim toward her and waited. John felt an inner dial move off the red. The kettle rattled. Outside the gale battered the house. Inside their breathing answered. Have you ever faced a moment where instinct overruled fear? Share your story below. The line rose in his mind like a prayer, said to strangers he would never meet. He set the mug down, tugged the coat tighter around Mercy, and listened for that inner click that marks the next tap. He heard it when the wind found a seam and the shutters banged. He drew the bolt and prepared to call for help. Behind him, Courage lifted his head. Mercy exhaled, a thin ribbon of sound. The house held them all, barely alive, and the night leaned close, waiting for what he would do. John knelt between the dogs and set a towel barrier beneath them. He trimmed brittle ice from whiskers and undercoat, combed knots with blunt fingers, and kept his voice steady. Courage endured the blade like a sentry, shedding frozen armor, jaw tight, eyes locked on John's hands. Mercy shivered beneath the coat he had slung across her, the tremor moving from shoulder to flank in pulses he could count. Her belly looked taut, skin drawn thin, with small shapes bumping softly from within. Every few breaths she gave a tiny whine and tucked her paws as if bracing for pain that stayed just out of reach. He rotated damp towels to a chair near the stove, and poured a bowl of lukewarm water. Courage rose gingerly on bandaged pads and nudged the rim toward Mercy before drinking. She took 2 careful laps and rested again, watching John with a patient, hurting focus that felt like a request and a test. He measured her respiration with his palm, fast and shallow, too light for a night like this, not yet the pant of active labor, but trending. The house held familiar shadows. Framed photos lined the mantel. One smiling face owned the center. The memory passed through him and settled. Routine had become the net that kept grief from dragging him under, and tonight routine would have to lift more than him. He crossed to the wall phone and dialed the number every rancher knew. The line crackled, then steadied beneath a clipped, calm voice. "Bennett, Doctor, this is John Carver on Elk Ridge. I brought in 2 German shepherds from the feed store shed. The male is injured but stable. The female is pregnant and trembling. Her color is poor. Her respiration is fast. I've warmed them slowly by the stove." Wind hissed on her end, then a pen scratched paper. "How long inside?" "About 30 minutes. "Good, don't overheat. Rapid reversal can crash them. Do you have a rectal thermometer?" "Yes, take her temperature, check for discharge and note any odor." He returned to Mercy with the receiver at his shoulder, read the number and checked. 96.8, clear trace, no blood, no smell. "Workable," she said. "Stress and cold can trigger labor. Expect weak contractions or inertia. Keep her dry, turn every 20 minutes if she allows it, and offer small sips of warmed water only. Gather clean towels, a bulb syringe, floss or suture, sterilized scissors, a hemostat, iodine and a basin. If a pup arrives with the sac intact, tear it at the muzzle immediately, wipe the mouth and nose and rub until breathing. Tie the cord twice and cut between. Never pull. If she strains hard for more than an hour with no progress, call me at once." Then Laura's tone soft. "I don't waste minutes. I lost my sister to an illness that outran us. Since then I point every hour at saving what I can. We'll work together. He let that promise stand beside Ellen's vow to never walk past need. Promises held houses up when storms tried their best. Light, she asked. Good, I can add a lamp. Do, and keep humidity up, dry air punishes lungs. The male may hover, let him stay where she can see him. His calm can help, guard her hindquarters so you can work. Courage had edged close enough that his shoulder touched Mercy's flank through the coat, a sentinel refusing to clock out. John rechecked the wraps, the splits looked clean, gauze snug without strangling. Courage relaxed when John's hand passed, trust trading back and forth across the inches between them. Have you eaten? Laura asked. Coffee, toast at least. Caregivers crash when sugar drops. I learned that the hard way in my first winter on call. He slid bread into the toaster and kept talking so she could hear the room in his description. He detailed Mercy's breathing and color, the way movement rolled under skin like tides crossing sand. He described Courage's composure, how he split attention between the man and the mother as if monitoring a perimeter and a heartbeat at once. Angle your reflector to spread heat along the floor, she said. Put a folded blanket under her pelvis to elevate slightly. If power flickers, keep one flashlight parked and one in hand. If a breech pup presents, support and angle gently downward to drain fluid. Suction if needed, then rub, rub, rub. If she stalls and looks spent, call me, we'll decide about calcium or dextrin. The shutters answered with gnaw and rattle. He banked coals and watched the grate throw steady light across damp fur, until sheen turned to true shine. He lined tools in a straight row where muscle memory would find them without thought. Mercy's tremors shift, not mere cold now, but a deeper quake that tightened her sides and made her jaw work. She lifted her head, sniffed John's sleeve and licked once as if asking and thanking in one motion. He slid his palm along her neck and felt the sine wave of stress settle ahead. He listened for the rhythm beneath breathing and heard the room answer with its own fire pulse, kettle hum, wind rattle, heartbeat. Think of a time you had to act under pressure, drop a word of encouragement below for others facing their storms. The appeal crossed his mind like a flare along a black horizon, brief yet bright, and he let it burn there, a tiny rally for whoever might need it. He checked the clock, minutes tied themselves into a rope of small knots, swap towel, rotate lamp, assess gums, offer water, breathe on purpose. He ate toast between steps, never leaving the rug for long. When he faced the photos again, gratitude and grief shared the same chair without arguing. How's she now? Laura asked. Her engine sounded closer, chains biting snow. Alert, shivering less, but tremors return in waves. Breathing is still rapid. She licks her vulva between rests, fatal movement steady. Good signs. If the temperature dips near 99 and then rises, active labor is near. She may stand, circle or dig, keep the male where she can smell him, but turn his head away from the business. Many dogs draw strength from a partner's presence. Yours seems like a good one. Yours seems like a good one. Courage lifted his head at John's voice and drifted nearer until his cheek touched Mercy's shoulder. He watched the flames the way people watch rivers, as if movement itself could convince the world to keep going. John thought of nights when silence felt like the larger threat, and how one steady soul could shorten the distance to morning. The phone cracked. I'm past the highway turn, Laura said. Visibility is ugly, but I'm moving. If anything changes, speak in short sentences and wait for my cue. He repeated procedures aloud: sac tear, airway clear, vigorous rub, clamp, tie, cut, return to mother. His voice surprised him with its steadiness. The room felt staged for a hard miracle, the kind that arrives because people refuse to quit. He cleaned his hands, warmed another towel and shifted Mercy a fraction to ease pressure. She gave a soft whine and tucked her paws, then pushed them out again as though choosing the position where her body preferred to fight. The air smelled of wet fur, wool and wood smoke, a layering of labor and shelter. Another gust hit. The house answered with old strength. The kettle hummed. Mercy exhaled long, eyes half-lidded, then rolled a glance up at John that asked a final unspoken question. Will you stay? He pressed his palm lightly against her ribs. I'm here. Her belly tightened hard beneath his hand and swept from thorax to pelvis in a clean, undeniable wave. Courage rose, ears forward. John met his gaze. then focused on the mother as muscle gathered for the first true push and the room braced itself for what came next. Mercy's first true contraction rolled beneath John's palm like a cord drawn from ribs to pelvis, and the room leaned forward with it. Firelight climbed the stove glass, slid across damp fur, and edged Courage's muzzle in copper. Outside, wind hunted seams and chewed at shutters. Inside, heat held and the air smelled of wool, iodine, and steam. Mercy tucked her forepaws, stretched and pushed, breath clipping in quick bursts. John knelt, with sleeves rolled, tools set in a straight row, voice low enough to steady instead of startle. Courage hovered a step away, bandaged paws planted, amber eyes tracking every move as if reading orders. The next wave came cleaner, harder, a bulge crowned, slick inside the intact sack. John flooded light to her hindquarters, tore the membrane at the muzzle, cleared mouth and nostrils with the bulb, then rubbed the small body briskly in a warm towel. The pup's tiny squeak pierced the storm's roar, a bright pin of sound threading smoke and wind. Mercy turned and licked, hot tongue pulling breath into fragile lungs. John tied twice with floss cut between knots and held until the chest rose on its own. Courage exhaled once, a low sigh that made the gale sound far away. A new heartbeat joined the room. A lull lets muscles reset. John fed a log, drank water, and touched the photograph on the mantel with 2 fingers. "Ellen," he murmured, a quiet report. "1." He returned before the next contraction could steal ground. Mercy shifted to a half squat, dug the towel, then bore down in a long, steady push. The second pup came faster but limp. John tore the sack, cleared the airway, rubbed harder, switched towels, rubbed again, breathed near the muzzle so warm vapor would kiss cold lungs. Nothing, then a flutter, then a frail squeal that gathered. Mercy curled around both and worked them clean, focus narrowed to life. He checked color, warmth, and reflex, set the pair to nurse, and felt the room find a new rhythm. Courage inched until his cheek touched Mercy's shoulder, then held, perfect sentinel respecting the line between help and interference. John met his gaze and nodded. "When has someone's trust changed you? Share a moment in the comment." The thought rose like steam and drifted back into the glow. The third surge hit harder, Mercy panted, then pushed in short bursts, then long. A slick face appeared and stalled. John angled down to drain fluid, supported his hips with one hand and waited for the next wave. It came, strong but not enough. He added gentle traction, never pulling against stillness, only following her effort until the body slid free at once, heavier than the others. He cleared, rubbed, and handed the pup to its mother, who accepted with a fierce, grateful kiss. John breathed, remembered the desert and the folded flag, and told the room he would not walk past need. He warmed fresh towels, reset tools, and checked Courage's wraps. The dog leaned into his hand, tremor settling as if touch itself were a post worth sharing. Minutes braided into a narrow line. Glass chimed as a log settled. The house braced old joints against a fresh blast. Mercy's breath deepened on the inhale, and sighed on the exhale. John set a palm to her abdomen, and felt the next ripple gather. The fourth pup presented breech, 2 paws and a tail. He greased his fingers, supported the hips, and waited for pressure, then guided with small, sure movements. The pup slid into his hands, quiet. He tore the sack, suctioned and rubbed hard until the chest answered with a ragged gasp, then set the pup against Mercy's warm. 4 small forms rooted along her side now, each finding heat and milk with single-minded insistence. Their tiny paws opened and closed as if kneading the world into place. Mercy sagged, eyes half-lidded, chest fast but steady. John stroked her head, thanks tangling with prayers he had never learned to shape, and tried not to think about how storms test the exact seam they find. He believed the hard part was done when the next contraction cut her with a sharp, punishing edge. She pushed, and nothing moved. He felt along the abdomen and found a knot that would not slide. The 5th had wedged high. He spoke to Ellen without moving his mouth. "Give me steady hands." He lubricated again, aligned carefully, waited for the next wave, and drew with the smallest traction that still respected her effort. The sack held around the face. He tore it, suctioned, and found silence. He rubbed harder. He swung the pup gently downward once to clear fluid, then rubbed again with a fresh towel, until his fingers cracked. The still chest quivered, lifted, and a thin squeak broke free. Then another, then a string of stubborn sounds that did not apologize for being late. John laughed once, surprised by it, and placed the pup where Mercy could see and clean. Courage touched John's wrist with his nose, then returned to his post by Mercy without looking away. The room drifted from crisis into ceremony. 5 pups nuzzled in a crescent, squirming toward heat, as if the world were a compass and love the pole. Mercy licked, counted, adjusted and began to relax by degrees. The storm kept gnawing at wood, but its voice felt distant, like a story told behind a closed door. Here, near the stove, John poured water, swallowed, fed the fire, and whispered a thank you that did not need to be heard to be true. He checked cords, spots of bleeding, the pull of each latch, and marked on a torn envelope 5 uneven ticks that meant life. Courage watched the list, then the pups, then John, and something settled in his posture, a granting of status soldiers recognize. Trust had crossed the room and chosen its station. John met that gaze and felt a weight he could carry replace the one that carried him. He wiped his hands, tucked extra towels along Mercy's back to trap warmth, and shifted the reflector to even the heat. He bent to her ear and said the name he loved as if it could build a shelter big enough for all of them. Ellen, look. The stove. He settled beside the dogs, shoulder to cabinet, palms loose on his knees, ready for anything yet allowing, at last, a breath that did not taste like duty. Mercy closed her eyes, exhaustion washing through like a tide after a night of storm. She kept one paw draped over the last-born, as if holding the world in place. The others nuzzled and squeaked, soft engines turning. Courage eased down with a grunt and set his head by John's boot, gaze never leaving the small heap of life. The kettle clicked, the fire breathed. Relief lifted John's chest until it felt almost light, and in that space, he understood the night had turned toward morning. Mercy exhausted but triumphant, the pups nuzzling her, and John overwhelmed by relief. He leaned back, closed his eyes and let gratitude and fear unwind in the quiet. John stayed by the stove after the 5th pup settled, listening as small sounds arranged themselves into a new kind of quiet. It was not the hollow stillness that had followed Ellen's funeral, nor the wary hush of storms. It felt layered, awake, like the house had taken a first deep breath. The pup squeaked and rooted, tiny paws ticked against towel weave. Milk-sweet air met wood smoke in a tender truce. Mercy dozed between checks, gathering her newborns with a slow, protective sweep each time one drifted. Courage lay close with his chin on bandaged paws, amber eyes tracking John's hands and then returning to the nest as if counting. Firelight turned damp fur into a low shine and folded the room into warmth that reached corners grief had kept cold. John leaned his head against the cabinet and closed his eyes. He let grief arrive without apology because there was room for it now. Tears came not like floodwater but like thaw, small rivulets that released pressure without sweeping anything away. He remembered the day Ellen taught him to hear faint heartbeats in bottle calves, how her laugh carried a tiny hitch when she surprised herself, how she touched animals as if asking permission and promising protection in the same gesture. He had carried that promise like a folded map and forgotten, for a while, where it opened. He opened it now. He saw her crouched in this same room with the stray husky they named Lark, a dry towel in one hand and humor in the other. She looked up and grinned the way she did when she wanted him to admit that kindness could be a strategy as well as a feeling. He whispered her name and felt how it fit in the air, not as a wound but as a door. "I kept walking, Elle," he said, voice low. "But tonight I turned back." Wind bumped the shutters in a rhythm that had lost its edge. Snow still pushed past the windows, but the tearing snarl had faded to a tired rush. The storm, having said everything it could, began to quiet. In the lull, the house presented itself again as a place to live, not merely endure. The table looked like a surface for supper instead of an island for supplies. The rocker's curves suggested rest instead of vigil. Even the old clock that ran fast by 5 minutes seemed eager to be useful and ordinary. He rose slowly to spare stiff knees and moved through tasks that felt ceremonial. He rinsed the bulb syringe and set it to dry. He folded clean towels into a square stack and swapped the wet rug for a dry one. He nudged a pot of broth onto the back burner. He left a window cracked a finger's width to keep the air honest and the humidity kind. Mercy lifted her head to watch, He showed her his hands before touching, slid a palm along her neck and thanked her with a scratch behind the ear. She sighed, then checked each pup again, counting by nose and paw. John returned to the chair and let quiet gratitude wash over him. Courage's gaze rested on him without demand. Mercy's eyes rose between licks, steady and aware. He thought about trust as a living way. Under fire, the man to your left keeps you breathing. In winter, a horse's confidence can carry both of you over ice. Tonight, trust had crossed species and settled in a triangle, dog to dog, dog to man, man to memory. He felt larger, not from pride but from belonging. He studied the pups. The firstborn wore a white blaze like a comet across a brow. The second had a darker coat and a stubborn voice. The heavy third drank as if late arrival required catching up. The breech-born fourth quivered, then steadied, learning courage by example. The last-born, smallest, tucked into Mercy's paw with a sigh that made even courage soften. John resisted the urge to name them. Names are vows, and he would make them in daylight with clean hands. When the broth reached a shy simmer, he poured a shallow bowl and set it near Mercy. She lapped twice, then nudged each pup in turn. Work done and still beginning. John sipped from his own mug and felt strength return in modest, honest amounts. He checked Courage's wraps, found a damp spot and changed the gauze with careful patience. The big dog tolerated the handling as if submission were a choice bestowed, not coerced. John knew that kind of gift. Marines call it earned belief. The clock ticked. The wind combed the spruces with a gentler hand. John carried an armload of wood from the porch and found the drift shallower than before, the night loosening its jaw. He set logs by the stove, brushed snow from his sleeves, and noticed how the scent of warm dog had replaced the metallic bite of fear. For the first time in years, his house sounded like a promise. He moved back to the rug and lowered himself to the floor with them. Mercy's breathing had lengthened into the slow tidal rhythm of rest. A pup squeaked, then settled under her chin. Courage shifted closer and let his flank touch John's boot, a deliberate link. He spoke to Ellen again, not seeking answers, only company. He told her how Courage had pressed a muzzle to his sleeve in the shed without a growl, as if selecting. He told her how Mercy had found his face and held it in her gaze, not pleading but measuring. He told her he had worked by Ellen's rules, not his gentler first, then firmer, respect before rescue, calm like a bridge. Pride did not strut. Outside, the storm thinned. The sky might still be a white field, but the violence had walked a mile away. He cracked the door and let fresh air feather the room. Cold met heat and made a brief, clean cloud that smelled like iron and pine. He shut it again, satisfied that the world had not ended, only changed its tone. In that small act, he realized the house was not a bunker, it was a heart. The difference is hope. Courage lifted his head and chuffed once. Mercy blinked awake and followed John's movement with calm eyes that did not ask a question so much as confirm an answer. He spoke to them the way Ellen had once spoken to frightened animals when they first arrived. You can stay, no one is leaving you behind. He did not know yet if they had owners, whether tattoos or scars would tell a hard story in daylight. He knew only this: abandonment does not get the last word here. He stood and peered through the window toward town. The feed store sign swung without that frantic snap now, just a metal tongue testing air. He pictured morning, Laura arriving with chains on tires, Tom Riley jumping from the passenger seat with blankets, Clara Hayes tucking a thermos into his hand. He imagined examinations and decisions made to keep the dogs safe. He imagined the drive to the Cody Animal Haven and the look on Rachel Kim's face when she met Courage and Mercy. He felt the tug of community forming around a choice he had made alone in whiteout. The pups shifted, small bodies satisfied for the minute. Courage relented and rested his jaw on the floor. Mercy's eyes found John's again and held. Gratitude lived there not as spectacle but as fact. He had believed for a long season that Ellen's kindness had perished with her, like a lamp with no oil. Watching these two, he understood that legacy is not a relic. It is a practice you either continue or betray. He had continued it tonight, not perfectly, not easily, but faithfully. He rubbed tiredness from his eyes and banked the fire to last an hour. He checked doors, then stood in the ring of heat and listened to the house. The ticking clock sounded like footsteps returning. The kettle's faint hiss sounded like someone clearing a throat before speaking good news. He tucked a blanket along Mercy's back and smoothed the fold near the smallest pup. A vow rooted itself without drama. He spoke it aloud because words make anchors when storms move on and doubt slips back in quieter weather. "I'll protect you," he said to Courage, to Mercy, to the 5 breathing commas that had turned his sentences into a new paragraph. "I'll see you to safety and see you through after." He looked at Ellen's picture and let the promise include her, because this was her kind of work. The wind softened another shade. In the stove a log settled into ember and glowed, not fierce but steady. The house felt alive again, and so did he. He sat back down on the rug, and Courage placed his paw in his open hand as if sealing the oath. Dawn could take its time now, they would be ready for it, together. Now, dawn arrived like a truce, pale light seeping through frost on the windows. The wind's snarl faded to a tired breath, leaving scalloped drifts along the fence and a hush over the yard. The stove ticked. 5 pups, nursed with fierce tiny mouths. Mercy breathed steadily, while Courage lifted his head at each distant crunch, ready for any call. John fed the fire, set water by the mother, and listened to the house wake again. Help would reach them once the road was cleared at last. Chains rattled outside, an engine idled, coughed, then steadied. John opened the door to a white world and a woman stepping down. Dr. Laura Bennett wore a parka and a knit cap, her eyes read the yard like instruments. Behind her came Tom Riley, tall, freckled, quick, a young ranch hand. Clara Hayes followed, thermos under one arm, folded quilt under the other. "Morning," Laura said, voice. "Roads were ugly, but your tracks helped." "Come in," John answered. "They're by the stove." Mudroom heat chased the cold from their cheeks. Tom's boots squeaked. Clara's scarf rustled. They entered the living room and paused. Mercy curled around the pups. Courage watched, alert but composed. Laura crouched a step away and offered the back of a gloved hand. Courage sniffed, flicked a glance toward John, then relaxed. Mercy lifted her head. Laura's gaze gentled. "You did well," Laura said. "Slow warming, hydration, quiet. That likely saved lives." Tom knelt near the male. "Hey buddy," he murmured, staying respectful. "Built of grit, aren't you?" Clara set the quilt nearby. "For transfer," she said. "Stitched it myself. Some journeys deserve soft landings." Laura opened a field kit and fanned out supplies. Stethoscope, thermometer, microchip scanner, antiseptic, syringes, gauze, glucose gel and a compact scale. She sanitized and began an exam that looked like choreography. Heart, lungs, capillary refill. Temperature, reflex. "Mercy is postpartum yet stable," she reported. "Cold stress resolving. The babies look vigorous." She weighed each pup, recorded numbers and returned them to warmth, then shifted to Courage. The big dog tolerated touch with disciplined poise. When Laura reached for his wrapped pads, he turned his face toward John. "Easy," John said, laying fingers on the shoulder. "She's here to help." Courage exhaled and allowed the check. Laura inspected splits, praised the bandaging and rewrapped with clean layers. The scanner chirped, then stayed quiet. "No chip." She parted her neck fur and frowned. Inked digits hid under guard hairs. Faint yet unmistakable. "Left ventral neck. Crude needlework," she said. Tom's marker was scratched. Logged. Laura examined the mother's neck and found a second set. "Illegal breeding," she said, keeping her tone flat. "Backyard mill or work. Tattoos like these substitute for records nobody wants traced. We'll notify the sheriff after intake." Clara's jaw tightened, tossed aside when profit falters. "Cowardice in new snow." "Not today," John said. Laura met his eyes. "Not today because you acted." They planned the transfer. 2 carriers waited in the truck, doors padded with towels. Mercy and pups would ride together. Courage would travel in a crate within sight. "We go slow," Laura said. "No sudden lifts, no cold shock." "Tom, bring the medium kennel and the large one, plus heat packs. Clara the quilt and spare blankets. John, keep a hand on Courage when I lift Mercy. He may crowd me out of duty." They rehearsed positions without touch. Then Laura slid an arm beneath Mercy's ribs, while John supported the hips. Clara steadied the quilt as a sling. Tom held the kennel close. Door wide. Courage rose, alert, then froze when John's palm found his shoulder. "Stay with me," John said. The big dog trembled once, then steady. Mercy accepted the cradle, eyes fixed on her babies. Together they eased mother and nursing bundle into the carrier as one soft mass, tucking the quilt around edges to keep heat in. Next came Courage. John clipped a leash symbol more than restraint and guided him forward. The crate waited open like a garage. Courage placed his front paws inside, checked the carrier holding Mercy and completed the step. John latched the door and touched the mesh. Courage leaned his nose there and breathed, steadying both of them. They paused for a careful sweep. Laura left written instructions in case the weather forced a return. She outlined legal steps: contact the sheriff, photograph tattoos, document placement and maintain the chain of custody. "I'll manage the forms," she said. "Your statement can wait until sleep." Tom and Clara lifted the carriers in tidy coordination, moving as if balancing teacups. John broke the path with his boots and held the door. Daylight sharpened to glitter. Drifts lifted bright edges. The air tasted metallic clean. At the truck, Tom secured Mercy's kennel behind the cab where vibration ran lowest. Clara strapped Courage's crate opposite, blankets stretched over the roof to block the wind. Laura checked every latch, tucked a checklist under a bungee like a blessing, and warmed the cat. "Cody Animal Haven is ready," she said. "Heats up, intake staff on site, isolation stalls prepared. Rachel's waiting with formula and donor milk in case supply dips." John looked from carrier to crate. Mercy's eyes found him through the grate, exhausted yet clear. 5 tiny shapes, shifted like living punctuation. Courage watched steadily, amber gaze linking them all. Laura squeezed John's shoulder. "You did more than haul bodies from snow," she said. "You returned when they were about to lose. That's courage where it counts." Her voice thinned for a heartbeat, grief bending it. "My sister would have called this holy." He nodded because anything larger would break him. "Thank you for coming," Tom grinned. "Feels good to ride toward the hopeful part." Clara patted his sleeve. "We aren't at the finish, dear. We're at the place where people decide to remain kind." Snow slid from a pine in a soft hush. The storm had gone to sulk on another ridge. Laura climbed behind the wheel, checked mirrors and waited while John knelt once more by Mercy's door. "You're safe," he whispered. "I'll see you soon." He crossed to Courage. "Watch over them." The dog blinked slowly, then settled with quiet resolve. Engines rumbled. Tires bit into packed powder. The truck rolled forward, carriers swaying gently, quilt corners lifting like flags until the road straightened. John stood with his hand raised until taillights dwindled and slipped beyond the spruces. Relief lifted his chest while a tender ache made room beside. The house behind him felt larger and quieter at once. He breathed the bright cold, tasted sunlight on iron air, and let the pang of parting stand with satisfaction rather than erase it. Inside he cleared the space by the stove, folded towels and banked the fire. The clock ticked toward a new hour. He looked at Ellen's photograph and offered a tired smile shaped like thanks. The yard glittered, tracks pointed toward town. Ahead doors would open, hands would lift and a haven would turn warmth into policy and care. John pulled on his coat, stepped to the porch and watched the road. The rescue had left and with it the worry he could finally set down. Recovery waited at the next turn. The Cody Animal Haven smelled of clean straw and warm soap, a soft answer to the brittle cold outside. Space heaters hummed, sun slid through high windows, and kennels glowed under low lamps. Volunteers moved with practiced quiet, jotting weights, mixing formula and stacking towels. In the nursery, Mercy lay on fresh bedding with 5 round pups pressed to her belly. In the next kennel, Courage rested, bandaged paws out front, eyes fixed on his family like a sentinel off duty but unwilling to look away. Rachel Kim checked the morning charts and paused at the doorway. Early 30s, hair tucked under a knit cap, she carried a tenderness that had learned endurance. The winter after her father died, she nearly left rescue work. A frightened terrier changed her mind by trusting her hands. She knelt by the mesh and let Mercy smell her glove before scratching lightly behind the ear. Mercy leaned, Courage sniffed, glanced toward the nursery again and relaxed as if his patrol could finally pause. "Good morning, brave hearts," Rachel said. She logged temperatures, checked hydration, and listened to Mercy's chest. Each pup earned a tiny collar with a letter bead. When she finished, she lingered, because time itself can be medicine. Beyond the nursery, intake buzzed, laundry thumped. A hound practiced not barking. Kids traced fog hearts on the viewing glass while parents read a poster about safe rescue. A county map on the wall traced saving routes like river lines. John arrived near noon with road grit on his coat and storm in his bones. After nights of wind and years of quiet, the Haven's noise felt like life knitted back together. Rachel met him with a quick, warm smile. "You must be John." "I'm Rachel. Laura said you'd come." "How are they?" he asked, voice sanded by cold and little sleep. "Better every hour," she said. "Mercy eats, nurses, rests. Courage holds morale and perimeter. Come see." They walked the corridor past clipboards and neat notes. Mercy lifted her head as if a wire tightened between them. Recognition crossed the space like heat. She whined softly. Courage stood and moved to the mesh, amber eyes steady. John pressed his hand to the grate. Courage touched it with his nose and breathed there until both steady. Mercy reached to lick John's knuckles. One pup tried to climb his boot and toppled into fleece. He laughed once, surprised at the sound. "You changed their slope," Rachel said. "We'll keep it angled toward home." She opened Mercy's kennel. John crouched and let the mother choose the distance. Mercy leaned her weight to his knee, then counted pups again. Work never fully done. Rachel checked sutures from a small tear Laura had repaired, praised healing and set a bowl of broth nearby. Courage accepted a fresh wrap on his pads and a measured walk in the run before curling near John's boot again, satisfied he had inspected the perimeter. Rachel gave a tour while the family settled. She showed quarantine stalls, the surgery room, and an outdoor run roofed in clear panels where dogs could sunbathe when the air was a bit. She spoke of small victories, porches reunited with wanderers, elders matched with calm companions. Her voice lifted when she mentioned a new program, Haven Ambassadors, animals who had endured and healed and now visited schools, churches and the courthouse lobby to model gentle strength. "Courage and Mercy," John said, glancing toward the nursery. "Names are already doing part of the work. They have presents too," Rachel said, "and a story people will carry." She looked away briefly, then added, "My dad loved second chances. He said they're the best kind of math. Have you witnessed a second chance? Share it below to inspire others." The line crossed John's mind like a bright track on snow. He believed people he would never meet might answer and feel less alone. Laura slipped in between calls, chain marks still on her boots, and grinned at the sight. "Intake complete. Sheriff notified," she said. "Tattoo photos filed. We'll watch for anyone asking the wrong questions." She squeezed John's shoulder. "Your choices gave them the hours I needed." The afternoon softened. A girl and her grandmother brought knitted blankets. A rancher dropped kibble and promised spare panels. Rachel taught John to mix a small supplement even though Mercy hardly needed it. She showed him how to guide a tiny mouth to a bottle without flooding lungs. He practiced until confidence replaced clumsiness. He signed the visitor log and sat in the corner just to watch them breathe. Play began as energy returned. Mercy dozed with one eye half open, ears tracking pup thumps. The five tumbled in wobbling arcs, wrestling a fleece donut, trying on barks that sounded like hiccup. Courage allowed brief visits, completed one slow lap of the nursery, nose moving, then lay near John's shoe. When Rachel spoke, both adults looked up. When John stood, they did too. Recognition moved both ways now, a current stronger than the weather. Rachel flattened a poster draft on a table. It paired a photo from last night, snow glare, stove glow, with a morning shot of Mercy nursing. At the bottom a line read, "Haven Ambassadors, teaching gentle strength across Park County." She placed the sheet where John could see and waited. "They're ready?" he asked. "They're chosen," she said. "If you agree." She held up a ribboned badge that would hang from a harness. "Ambassador," he swallowed. "They've already done the work." Rachel clipped the badge to a trial strap and let Courage inspect. He booped the ribbon, then looked at John as if confirming the chain of command. John laid a hand between his ears. Together. Mercy lifted her head and touched her nose to the badge, a mother's assent. The pup squeaked as if voting aye. They rehearsed visits and small steps. Rachel coached doorway manners, soft eye contact and pauses that let anxious hands choose. Courage learned to stand while a child tugged a sleeve gently. Mercy practiced greeting from a mat while puppies slept behind a barrier. John, at Rachel's suggestion, read aloud from a children's book to accustom them to group voices. His words, steady and simple, braided with the soft room hum. Courage leaned closer as if language were a warm thing. Evening tilted gold. The map winked with pins. Laundry quieted. The hound forgot to practice. Laura returned with a schedule. School library Tuesday, church breakfast Sunday, courthouse lobby Friday for walk soft, the de-escalation effort that gives visitors a calm minute before hearing. Rachel slid the page into a sleeve and set it by the door. John stood between the kennels and let the day gather. He saw Ellen in the corners, her hands showing him how to be gentle first, firm. He felt the house inside him, the one he had thought would never be full again, expand to make room for more life than he expected. Courage pressed his muzzle to John's palm through the mesh and left it there until both breathed more slowly. Sleep here tonight if you want, Rachel. We've got a cot and back. I'll head home and be back early, he said. You have what they need. You gave them what they needed first, she answered. That's why this part can happen. Lights dimmed to evening set. Mercy curled around her pups. Courage settled where he could see the door and the family. The haven glowed with routine. Feeders stacked, floors mopped, notes clipped, heaters steady. Outside, stars pricked a sky scrubbed by wind. John touched the badge, not as decoration but as a vow with a schedule. The program had its first pair. Courage and Mercy were chosen as ambassadors for the new rescue effort, their story walking ahead of them into schools and halls where gentle strength can change a. The new training wing opened on a Saturday when winter sunlight turned the lot to glitter and breath fogged. Cody's family arrived in knitted hats. Banners painted by students read "Walk soft, lead with care, second chances live here." Space heaters, paper paw prints along the corridor carried wishes in marker. Be gentle, be brave, be patient. Behind glass, Courage and Mercy waited on tidy mats, badges clipped to harnesses. Mercy watched the doorway with a mother's calm. Courage watched the room with measured ease, lowering his head whenever a child needed courage. Rachel greeted guests and handed out cards with 3 rules. Ask permission, approach slowly, and let the animal choose. Her welcome softened shoulders. Laura moved through the crowd, answering questions about the days after the blizzard. Stories bring people here, she told a grandfather, but daily care keeps them alive. John came late to stand at the back and let pride breathe. He wore a dark jacket and the watch cap that served as quiet armor when the valley turns harsh. When he stepped in, Courage raised his head, nostrils flaring as if the man's scent rode the light. Mercy followed a beat later, tail sweeping once, then settling because ambassadors keep composure. Their eyes found him and softened like a room when someone you hoped for finally arrives. A bell chimed, the ribbon cutting began. The sheriff thanked the haven for careful documentation after the tattoo discovery. A pastor offered a blessing for patience in loud homes and calm in rooms where attention runs short. Rachel cut the ribbon while Mercy leaned to sniff the satin and Courage held still, proving the lesson without a word. The crowd flowed into the wing as if the building had opened a heart. Workshops started in stations. Kids learned to read ears, tails, and eyes from simple cards. A deputy explained why kindness is efficient. Calm is faster, he said. Laura demonstrated basic checks. Lift a lip to see gum color. Feel along ribs to judge weight. Keep hands confident so worry does not travel. Rachel coached doorway greetings with Mercy. Hands at your sides. Ask first. Let her say yes. Children practiced, stumbled, tried again and stood taller when Mercy touched their knuckles with a warm nose. In a play ring, the 5 pups tumbled while volunteers rotated duty and laughter. Tiny collars flashed under the light. Visitors knelt to watch and rose more slowly, as if something inside had been set back into play. Through it all, John sat in the glass room and listened to the soft noise healthy places carry. Zippers sliding, lists rustling, cups tapping lids, sneakers squeaking. The small gasp when a timid child learns conversation can be silent. He studied 2 photographs on a poster, the before image from his house the night of the storm, and the after saturated with mourning. Another board mapped school visits with notes like library. 3 readers stood tall in courthouse, fewer shouts. A girl in a red coat asked if courage had been afraid. John did not rise. We were all afraid, he said. Courage made fear useful by guarding. A boy asked whether Mercy still remembered the cold. Laura answered that bodies remember for a while, but hearts can be taught to rest. The pups chased a ball and learned with Rachel's help that excitement climbs and then returns to stillness. By afternoon the air smelled like cocoa, wet wool, straw and soap. Sun slid across the concrete and turned the glass wall into a panel of light. The sheriff pinned a certificate and shook John's hand. You bought them time with your choices, he said. Time told the truth. Now this program will buy other families time before mistakes grow teeth. John let the words sit like a stone in his pocket. Rachel and Laura stood near the door, watching families leave. Look at those shoulders, Rachel said. Lower, easier. This is how responsibility sticks through practice. Laura nodded. Medicine starts the day. This keeps it going. They watched Mercy pause for a last child, who whispered the permission phrase and then got it right. They watched courage adjust to a walker, matching pace like water beside a keel. A teacher wiped her eyes and called the program a habit shaped like a miracle. As evening neared, John returned to the glass. The pups slept in a jumbled knot, bellies round, paws twitching through a dream chase only they could see. Mercy cleaned a paw, then tucked her nose along the line of her broom. Courage settled by the window with his chest toward the hall and his eyes half closed. A guard who trusts the watch is shared. John placed his hand on the pane. Courage lifted his paw and pressed it to the same spot, slower now. Not for show but for recognition. Through the barrier, man and dog held a quiet that felt like a completed sentence. Something healed there, not with fanfare but with the light click when a door you thought was stuck finally swings. Rachel joined him. We're adding them to the ambassador's roster, she said. School library on Tuesday. Courthouse on Friday. Church breakfast on Sunday. I know you have the ranch, but there is a place for you if you want it. Read to little ones. Walk with teens who need quiet. You do not have to tell your story, standing nearby will do. I'll be here, he said. I can carry water, hold doors and read when asked. That is everything, she said. The lights shifted to evening. Volunteers stacked chairs. A janitor ran a mop. Outside the day lowered itself onto snowy roofs, blue deepening to purple around land. Laura stepped in one last time, tapped 2 fingers at Mercy and then at Courage. A wordless salute. John raised a hand in return. A small announcement followed with simple music and the hush that comes after shared effort. Thank you for celebrating our new training wing. Our first Haven ambassadors, Courage and Mercy, will lead visits throughout the county this winter. Their story will help us teach patience, responsibility and the power of a calm voice. Applause rose again. John watched them and felt healed. He pressed his palm to the glass and let gratitude pass through the pain like heat. Rachel slipped a flyer into his pocket. Children laughed nearby while a volunteer swept straw into neat piles. The wing glowed like a hearth. The pups stirred and resettled. Mercy slept with one ear tilted toward the hall. Courage kept his post, not rigid, simply present. John looked at Ellen's name on the tag he wore and knew he had honored her rules. Gentle first, then firm, respect before rescue. Calm like a breeze. With coats on and doors closing, people carried home more than handouts. They carried a practiced way to be kind. The program had its first pair, and a county had new teachers who could not speak, yet still said more than most speeches. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe and write amen in the comments as a prayer for second chances. Let's spread compassion together.